Please welcome Bob Eckardt, Executive Vice President, Cleveland Foundation.
Well, good morning. On behalf of the Cleveland Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to this exciting morning. For those of you who know me, I don't usually have this device. I'll give you a two-word warning: gopher holes. Avoid them, or else you'll end up with a jammed knee. So I apologize for being in this slightly disabled state. I'm really excited that the Cleveland Foundation has the opportunity to co-sponsor this today. We've been thinking a lot about our history. We're coming up on our centennial in 2014, and thinking about the creative period of Cleveland at the turn of the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, when so many new organizations started and when Cleveland was kind of a leader in innovation in human services, in banking. Our founder did a lot of original work in creating a people's bank that really changed the face of banking. In terms of technology, where Cleveland had one of, if not the first, wind turbines, significant efforts in electronics, et cetera. And I think what we need in Cleveland is to kind of recreate that period of innovation, that period of risk-taking, that period of entrepreneurship. One thing the Cleveland Foundation is looking to do is to figure out how we might play that role in technology. We'll be talking to our board this month about the creation of a technology fellow. Some of you know we've used fellows in the past to create new energy, new activities in areas like advanced energy or international relations. So we expect our board will approve a commitment to a maybe 2 to 3 year fellowship in technology. So I think that will hopefully build off the work today. So with that, I wish you the best and look forward to hearing all the presentations. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Lev Gonik, Vice President for Information Technology Services, Case Western Reserve University.
Good morning. Good morning. Let me thank, first of all, Bob Eckardt for joining us and sponsoring this morning's gathering. Let me also bring greetings to everybody here and online for what we know will be an exciting morning. In early June, I got a call telling me that after 18 months of gestation, the White House was going to finally launch US Ignite. And the conversation that morning was what I might recommend to the White House and to US Ignite in way of an impactful set of ideas that might demonstrate the value of next-generation broadband and that might provide the audience at the White House an opportunity of actually seeing and experiencing what is possible. It didn't take me but a second to think of Drs. Sloan and Selman here at Case Western Reserve from our Department of Neurology and surgeons in neurology who've been working to produce what has now been called a surgical rehearsal platform. And without any further ado, I want to invite Dr. Selman and Dr. Sloan to the stage to give a demonstration similar to the one that they did just about 2 months ago at the White House.
Thanks, Bob. Good morning. We also want to extend our welcome and thanks very much for having us. I am Warren Selman, the Neurosurgeon-in-Chief at University Hospitals Case Medical Center, and this is my colleague, Dr. Andrew Sloan, a professor of neurosurgery at Case Western Reserve University as well. We're going to really demonstrate a clipping of a microsurgical aneurysm treatment, a very delicate procedure, one that needs really a lot of skill and, as you'll see, a lot of rehearsal and practice, because if you're unfortunate enough to have one of these, you want to make sure that your surgeon knows exactly what they're doing and how to treat it. And what we want to demonstrate today is really the power of the ability to collaborate remotely and the ability of us to be able to rehearse what we need to do to make sure that we improve patient safety and improve outcomes. So without any ado again, I'll let Dr. Sloan begin to start.
All right. Well, so this is an aneurysm case, actually one of Warren's cases, and I'm going to sort of simulate a potential clipping. And just to set the scene, there are a number of different types of aneurysms. There are several hundred different types of clips that one could choose. In the interest of time, we're basically going to do one. But one of the key things that you can do with this platform is practice, simulate, and see, is this the right clip? Should we have a slightly curved clip? Should we have a longer clip? Should we have an angled clip? Should we have a bayoneted clip? There are many possibilities. And so this is, and that also accounts for a fair amount of the intraoperative time, where often people put a clip on and off a number of different times. So I'm going to put this clip on here. And I'm going to put it a little bit high, which is a little bit suboptimal. And just we'll get to see what it looks like from the standpoint of.
It's one thing you never want to hear in the OR. Let me guarantee you that. So what Dr. Sloan is doing is he's actually applying the clip to the aneurysm, which you can see pretty much outlined right here, is really a blister on a blood vessel. And actually every beat of the heart, blood is flowing through there. And it's almost like a gossamer thin wing that is keeping the blood inside this aneurysm. And what he's just done is put the clip on to exclude the blood from going in there, but while keeping the arteries that supply the brain open, because if we close those off, we can deal with a stroke. And so we don't want to do that. And what I can do while remotely sitting with the use of the surgical theater is to be able to rotate this scene and see exactly what has happened to where the aneurysm has been clipped. So although I'm looking, this is a scene that I see through the microscope, I'm actually using the collaborative theater or the surgical theater to be able to look and say to Andy, even though I'm not in the room, you know what, Andy, that clip isn't placed quite well, because as you can see, there's still a lot of the aneurysm that needs to be clipped below here. So while we take the ability to clip the aneurysm out of really the surgery environment so that oops that you heard doesn't occur in the OR, I can say, Andy, tell you what, your clip would need to be placed a little lower. And what Andy is actually doing is rehearsing. I mean, it's really no different. You can't even begin to think that Phil Mickelson or Bubba Watson would go to the Masters and just go to the tee box and ride off and start swinging. No, they go to the practice range. And really what we know is that it's not just practice makes perfect, it's perfect practice or purposeful practice that makes perfect. And here we're able to have a mentor remotely guide another surgeon and say, let's try that clip a little bit lower. And two things are happening. One, we're optimizing the ability to get a good clip placement and prevent complications and improve patient outcome while being actually outside the OR environment. And two, Dr. Sloan is developing muscle memory, the same idea that you do when you practice that swing over and over again. So the next time that clip goes on, it goes on perfectly. And the advantage is now you can see the aneurysm is successfully clipped and the blood will continue to flow through the brain through these very important arteries. So essentially, we're able to prevent complications by this collaboration and by this remote mentoring.
This is a huge advantage, particularly when we're training residents, because as you know, we have much more limited time than we used to, and yet we have to teach these residents in the same amount of years, perhaps twice as many procedures. And they have to finish and be competent to do these in the community. And so how do you do that? They have obviously less hours in the OR because of work duty restrictions. Here they can rehearse very efficiently this aneurysm 6, 7, 8, 10 times, as many times as they want to. Before, they would have to do that many cases, each of which lasts 6, 7 hours.
But the important point to remember also is it's not just teaching residents, it's the fact that we're talking about real patients, real lives right now. And there simply are not enough, quote, master surgeons or top guns to be able to treat every patient everywhere throughout this country. There's just a limited number. So what we can do is really improve outcomes. It's been shown over and over again that even an experienced surgeon will have a better outcome if they are able to rehearse or mentally visualize and actually practice the procedure beforehand. And by this technique, we can actually remotely mentor and monitor not only experienced surgeons, perhaps less experienced surgeons from anywhere in the country or in fact around the world, so a particular patient gets a much better outcome. So we're not talking about something that happens in the future or training, although that is very important. We're talking about right now the ability, by the use of the collaborative theater and the surgical rehearsal platform, to be able to provide that type of learning and mentoring that will immediately result in improved outcomes.
And it's also very clear that if you can put the clip on perfectly the first time, then it will not only reduce operative time, which decreases medical complications from surgery, but also potentially decrease surgical complications from surgery that happen when one has to sort of experiment and put a clip on, take it off, put it on, take it off, to get the perfect clip application. Here, you already know the perfect clip application. You can figure out what angle, what type of clip, what angle of clip, what size of clip. All those variables are no longer part of the equation.
And so where are we going in the future? Well, the future is not just to be able to sit down in my office and do this, because I'm not really going to be having the opportunity to do that. You want me in the OR. That's where I'm most effective. So what we're going to do is actually take this and put it right in the operating theater so that with a very few minutes and by a hands-free technology, I can get all my team members together, say, look, here's a very specific, this is this patient, this is the anatomy, this is what I'm going to do. And on a large screen, just like you saw, I'm going to say, I'm going to put the clip here, this is the clip I'm going to use. I can rotate the images and say, this is what we're going to expect to do. So every team member is on board. We increase the efficiency, and again, I think this will very much help improve patient safety and outcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we're going to break down surgical theater, and our next speaker is actually someone who I hope will be able to give the audience here context. Context matters. As we think about the challenges facing our region, as Bob Eckardt from the Cleveland Foundation indicated, and the opportunities ahead, as we think about this context for our nation, the challenge of thinking about how to provide America with its next big upgrade in the infrastructure required to be competitive in the 21st century, something that we worry about here in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, and of course in Washington and around the country, is really a very big challenge and a really big issue. So when I thought of somebody who might be able to come and share with us a set of insights on context, I figured, well, we should get an insider, somebody who's been in Washington. So maybe the chief of staff of the former chairman of the F.C.S. That'd be a good person. But I also wanted somebody who kind of was helping think about broadband. So maybe I could get a guy in who maybe architects or thinks about, broadband policy for the country. That'd be a good guy to bring in. And then I thought, well, we really want somebody who can also relate all that policy kind of stuff maybe to actually rolling up their sleeves and actually, doing one of these big national projects underway, like the GigU initiative, for example. I think, maybe I should bring that guy in. Well, it turns out I only had to invite one guy. Blair Levin is the former chief of staff of the FCC chairman, Hunt Reed. He wrote and architected the nation's first broadband plan, and he is the founder and executive director of GigU, the consortia of 37 research universities across the country working on the delivery of next-generation broadband to neighborhoods around our universities. Please join me in welcoming Blair Levin.
Thank you very much, Lev, and it's great to be back here in Cleveland discussing these issues. And Lev has revealed that I obviously suffer from a little bit of schizophrenia in my various different broadband, wearing different broadband hats. But I want to start by asking the question, what do the following things have in common? The fact that genetic sequencing can save cancer patients facing a death sentence, that immersive gaming can massively increase the effectiveness of education and job training, how entrepreneurs and business owners are visualizing a dawning era of big data to revolutionize all manner of collaboration and analysis, as we've just seen, and that the next generation of video with a 4K video with wide-ranging applications in healthcare, public safety, and education, as well as entertainment, is dawning. And the answer to all of these things is that they all need much bigger bandwidth today than that we have in this country to achieve their full potential. So what I want to do today is talk about two ideas related to big bandwidth. The first is that within the next decade, entrepreneurs somewhere in the world will find ways to use much bigger bandwidth to improve our lives, and therefore communities that wish to be part of that innovation process need hubs where small businesses and residents have the opportunity to use big bandwidth. The second idea is that a long-standing communication social contract between communities and providers is about to be rewritten. And in that process, any community that wants a hub of world-leading connectivity can have it. The barrier is not technology or economics as much as it is organization. So let's step back for a second and think about what makes an economy productive in today's economy. One factor is certainly knowledge exchange. This is an input into pretty much every good and service that we now have in our economy, where we take data, analyze it, collect it, disseminate information, and have a feedback loop based on that critical knowledge exchange process. Another thing that makes an economy effective is when we exchange inputs from the old goes out and the new comes in. We know this in the United States. We certainly saw it in England in the Industrial Revolution. But a century ago, as Bob Eckardt was talking about, Cleveland led because as part of this great American transformation, we were exchanging iron, coal, and trains with steel, electricity, cars, and planes. Now, future leadership depends on our dexterity in exchanging inputs based on atoms with today's world, inputs based on microprocessors, fiber optics, and digitization. And so these trends come together over broadband, which is the commons of knowledge exchange. We're exchanging inputs and we're facilitating knowledge exchange. And America thrived in the last century, and all around us in Case Western we see evidence of how we were thriving in the last century by exploiting the new and abundant industrial infrastructure that enabled leadership and productivity and innovation. The foundation for leadership today requires two fundamental building blocks. One we might think of as a strategic broadband advantage, and the other is a psychology of bandwidth abundance. Now, a strategic bandwidth advantage is having the right bandwidth delivered to the right person, whether it be a doctor, as we just seen, who might need a gig to do that kind of surgical theater or 3D MRIs, or differently, a farmer who needs to have a 4G wireless picture in the field. But in either case, and in all cases, we want to make sure that bandwidth is not a constraint on innovation and productivity. And secondly, we need a psychology of abundance, that we can have abundance of the key inputs of the contemporary economy. And that's been a critical fuel for the uniquely American spirit of experimentation and innovation. Unfortunately, the current environment suggests that we are not building on that foundation. International studies on wireline differ, but all suggest that we're mid-tier at best. Most of the fastest cities in the world are not in the United States. And that means that no American communities are hubs of world-leading bandwidth sufficient to birth the big bandwidth businesses. Instead, those communities are in other countries. Moreover, for the first time since the beginning of the internet, which we birthed, we do not have a single national wireline provider with plans to deploy a better wireline network. And so for most Americans, 5 years from now, the best network available to them will be the same network that they have today. And as a result, the best networks, along with the innovations that they enable and the enterprises that created them, will live in other countries as well. Now, some suggest that we will never need speeds higher than we have today. This is contrary to our history, both in terms of bandwidth and human creativity. But it is true that today's demand does not justify building gigabit networks everywhere. The question is rather, will we have a critical mass of communities with the kinds of networks that lead demand and enable gigavations, innovations that come along when bandwidth is not a constraint? Now, many American communities want to be the birthplace of those discoveries, and we should want them to do so. But current market forces today are not encouraging this. In fact, current market forces are encouraging the harvesting of investments made many years ago rather than investing into growth. But as former President Clinton said the other night, the problem is fundamentally arithmetic. And in particular, this is the arithmetic. He was talking about fiscal government policy. This is the arithmetic of the upgrade. At this point in time, the costs of an upgrade the costs of the upgrade are greater than the benefits of an upgrade for the private sector investor into these networks. And so that brings me to my second idea, which is that the social contract between communities and communications carriers is breaking down, and it will be replaced. And when it is, one of the key issues will be whether a community that wants an upgrade has a path to that. Now let's take a look back at the social contracts. The first one was almost 100 years ago, AT&T, and was something called the Kingsbury Commitment. And the basic idea was that AT&T would get a monopoly in exchange for bringing a service everywhere. There was a broadcast social contract between the broadcasters, radio and television, in which they got spectrum in exchange for being a public trustee in delivering a service to all Americans. There was a cable social contract represented in about 10,000 franchise agreements between local governments and cable companies. Now, all these agreements have been modified by subsequent actions, but nonetheless, the economics of the underlying the current agreements do not reflect the current reality. And I think we need to confront this openly and honestly, that the lifespan of the current agreements is limited, and they have to be redone. Now, some are already acting to redo this. I should have said this is how everything is moving to internet protocol. Verizon is currently in court arguing that under the First Amendment, they have a right to edit, as a newspaper editor edits, anything that travels over their network. Without getting into a constitutional argument, I would just note that if Verizon were to succeed, the court would have unilaterally rewritten the social contract by throwing out huge portions of federal law, state law, and all the local franchising. Similarly, there is a move, California just passed this bill, prohibiting the regulation of IP-based services, which, as all services will eventually move to IP, is another effort to rewrite the community communication social contract. Now, my point is not to oppose or support any particular regulatory effort. That's not the subject of today. But I do think that we should make sure it is not done unilaterally, it is not done by a court, it should be a bilateral process. And the point for today is that communities that want to have an upgrade should have a path to get them there. Now, I'm a big believer in the efficacy of markets to solve many problems. Market forces, however, will not address the communications needs of our communities, all the needs. But communities have an obligation to articulate, particularly given the changes in the marketplace, what is now important to them. You know, what should be the baseline build-out? What are the public goods like 911 or public access channels that should be retained? What safety requirements should be put on the network operators? Who can share in the community rights of way? And as we start to rewrite this contract anew, it's really important, I believe, and that's the context that I think Lev was talking about, that we create a path for any community that wants to organize to get a world-leading network to obtain that. Because it's not a matter of technology, it is a matter of organizing communities to change the math from fundamentally what I showed you before, where the expenses are greater than the benefits. And what we need to do is we need to break down that formula, and any community that wants to has to look at what they can do to assist either existing or potential providers by lowering CapEx, lowering OpEx, lowering risk, and increasing the revenues and the competitive threats. Now, I should note that we've actually done this before as a country, that in fact every new communications network deployment or upgrade has been preceded by a policy change that had one or more of those impacts. Stimulating an upgrade does not require massive new government funding or regulation. In fact, in less than a year, based on what was going on here in Cleveland, the great beta block prototype, the GigU coalition of about 36 leading research universities and communities, through a very productive dialogue with industry, has already catalyzed over $200 million for private efforts to build out gigabit hubs in nearly a dozen communities around the country, as well as a project to bring a 25 times upgrade to hundreds of communities in rural America, stimulating new approaches and business models for broadband. And then there's the Google Fiber project, 100 times the speed, 100 times the possibilities, that will no doubt increase the interest of communities in creating world-leading broadband to drive economic growth. These efforts are both driving toward a strategic bandwidth advantage for those communities and a psychology of bandwidth advantage in those communities, where people in those communities can contemplate what happens when we remove bandwidth as a constraint on innovation and productivity. We don't know precisely where this will lead, but we can know that America's spirit of innovation, which has been a great gift to the world, can produce another round of such gifts. As Bob Eckardt said, it's time to have another round here in Cleveland, and it's also time for us to have another round for America's great innovative gift to the world, if we have a broadband platform that enables it. Now, this spirit of innovation and adventure was wonderfully expressed by a student when we started the project at the University of Maine, which will go live later this month, I believe. And he said that while having the world's fastest network would bring immediate benefits to a startup he was doing in the state, the most exciting thing was what we don't know yet. What we don't know yet is embedded, as the most exciting thing, is embedded in the DNA of every great American journey, each of which began with great optimism and no map. Whether it be Columbus, Lewis and Clark, the astronauts, the fathers of broadband, American heroes don't make the map. They don't follow a map, they make the map. And what we're doing here today is beginning that challenge of charting America's big bandwidth map. Thank you very much.
Thanks, terrific, terrific. Thanks so much, Blair. It's a terrific overview, sweeping in its breadth, and lots of important nuggets on the depth and the opportunities going forward. Well, the safe part of the morning is over, from a technology perspective, at least. As being set up around me is actually an opportunity for a group of students to join me up here, along with our good friend and co-conspirator in many, many collaborations, Roz Strickland. Let me briefly introduce Roz and her program, and then give her the floor for the next 10 minutes. Students will be coming out, and hopefully their chairs will, or whatever it is that our setup is going to be. Roz is actually the Senior Director of the Office of Civic Education Initiatives at the Cleveland Clinic. She and her colleagues have engaged in a transformational engagement directly with young people, both at the Cleveland Clinic and through the Cleveland Clinic, reaching all over the region. Together with her colleagues, all the way up to the CEO, Toby Cosgrove, realize that the Cleveland Clinic is more than just a place that people go to get great health care. It's also a fantastic opportunity to use the work that goes on at the Cleveland Clinic as an opportunity for actually teaching young people about the opportunities for their future, and opportunities for their pursuit of education, and perhaps professional pursuits as well. For the last half dozen years or so, Roz has been working with surgeons at the Cleveland Clinic to bring a unique offering to students which is to experience and interact in real time over big broadband networks with the world's leading surgeons at the Cleveland Clinic. This morning, Roz is actually going to be interacting with surgery that began 4 minutes ago with Dr. Mark Luciano, who is actually engaged right now as we speak in brain surgery, in neurology, and he's actually engaged this morning, if I got this right, Roz, in a pediatric brain surgery. And so I'll pass the floor on to Roz, and thank you, students, for taking time to be with us. And we look forward to your interactions and learning, I think, what's going on in the surgery right now.
Thank you, Lev. I do need to say that this was an opportunity brought to us at the Cleveland Clinic through One Community and also partnering with Lev at Case Western Reserve. And the goal was to bring broadband to the Cleveland schools, to every single building, so that we could enhance the learning. But not just enhance the learning, look at where kids are today. Kids need to see what is really going on. How does what we're learning in the classroom really connect to the real world? And as the Cleveland Clinic looks to play an important and take a major leadership role in preparing the next generation of healthcare professionals, as you can see, they're already dressed for the part, it is important for them to really see what is going on. So we started looking at how we could bring the surgical theater into the classroom to bring biology and the other sciences to life and give students the opportunity to interact. Dr. Luciano has been a partner with me in this endeavor, and you're going to see brain surgery, and we're going to be, the students are going to be asking him questions as he is performing the surgery, and then we can talk later. Dr. Luciano?
Good morning, Rosalind. Good morning, students. And good morning, everybody. Welcome to the neurosurgical operating rooms at the Cleveland Clinic. Amazingly, you're here just in time. We've been working to prepare and have gotten to the point where we hope to show you something inside the brain using our endoscopes through a small hole. My name is Mark Luciano. I'm the head of pediatric neurosurgery here, and I'm going to be assisted by Dr. Andrew Torres-Healy and Dr. John Raphael, and our excellent staff of anesthesiologists and nurses. Let me introduce you to our patient, at least in picture form. This patient came to us in his 70s with problems with balance. This is a picture of his head looking off to the side. It's a profile. And these black areas are fluid accumulation that's building up inside his brain. That's called hydrocephalus. It's blocked from coming out by a blockage back here, which doesn't let the fluid escape the brain as it usually would. We make a pint a day, and if that fluid gets trapped inside, it squeezes the brain, and in him was making him very unstable, increasing number of falls, and it leads to memory problems, and eventually leads to basically very little activity. So we need to find a way of allowing the fluid to get out. We're going to go into the brain from this right frontal area, into these fluid spaces, down through the fluid spaces, and make a hole at the base of the fluid space, and actually be looking at an area that is underneath the brain. So we're going to be entering above the brain, going through the fluid spaces of the brain, and be looking, we hope, underneath the brain, allowing the fluid to pass out. Let's go over to the operative table. What we've been doing since you've been here, is placing a catheter down in the direction that I pointed on the MRI. This is a catheter which goes through the skull, through an area of the brain, and into the fluid space we talked about. When this catheter goes in, it creates a plastic channel for us to go through safely. We take out the middle, and we actually have a hollow chamber which we can go down with our endoscopes and look inside the brain. I should tell you, obviously, this is an actual and live operation, and this is a situation in which the patient comes first. We're going to do this operation as I would do it ordinarily every day. we are accustomed to having students here and asking questions. Usually they come in wearing paper shoes and masks and hats, but you're welcome here through the camera. What we're going to do is give you a view of inside the brain. First, let me show you how the scope is working. Do we have the picture of the scope? All right, you can see here. Scope is up. All right. And let the camera rotate. We just make sure our vision is okay. And we're all set and straight. All right. You can see here that I'm focusing the camera. Let's just lock this up. That we're focusing the camera. Camera rotate, please. Just some water's getting in the way. I'll show you. Thank you. Here. You can see here our entry point through the skull, and that's just water that's getting in the way here. It won't once we're inside. And that's the channel that we're going to go down to enter the brain. So let's turn on the water, please. We're in the tunnel now. And we have an air bubble that I have to get rid of. We're going to keep that water going. Down the channel, into the fluid chamber. That's the ventricle of the brain. The brain has natural fluid chambers. So we're in, so to speak, a room in the brain. And at the bottom is something called the choroid plexus. That's what makes the fluid that we're looking at. It's a little bit of an unusual situation here. We usually would go through this door to get to the next fluid space. But as you can see, there's a large vein crossing that way. We can't get into that door. Well, in this situation, we do have another side that we can look at. So we're going to go off to the other side. This is the left side. And look into that door. And now we're looking in the bottom of the third ventricle, at the floor of the third ventricle where we want to make our hole. You know, I think I might have to do this. So could we have the balloon placed inside, please? We need the balloon. What we're looking at is the floor of this chamber. The walls and the floor of this room actually are parts, very important parts of the brain. You're going to see a probe coming down in a moment. I just want to see the tip. And Andrew, if you would get the syringe ready for the balloon. Okay? We're going to go in. And, oh, come up a little bit. That's good. Now go in. And push in. We're going to make a hole. And we're going to do this. Go down.
The wire out?
No, wire in.
Okay.
Making the hole at the base. This is a probe which is designed to make this hole. Push in further. Excellent. All right. Now, Andrew, hold the catheter in place. And John, would you take out the wire? So we've now made a hole at the floor of the third ventricle. This is actually what keeps us out of the space below the brain. Keep that in the hole. In this area, at around 7 o'clock, you'll see a reddish area. That's a very large artery that feeds much of the back of the brain and part of the important brainstem. Our goal is to make this hole bigger to allow the fluid in this ventricle to escape. Keep that in.
Dr.
Excellent.
Luciano?
Yes.
We want to allow the students to ask a couple of questions.
Okay.
Before we close. So who would like to start?
What neurological tests will be run to see if the procedure was successful?
What neurological tests will be run to see if the procedure was successful?
After the operation, we do an MRI study to see if we could see the hole that we create. There's also a way to look at the motion of the fluid through the ventricle. Are we going to expand the balloon?
Okay.
Expand the balloon. So we could actually see the flow. Here you see the balloon expanding, and we're going to practice this. This is a bit of a tricky skill for us to be able to expand the balloon and expand that window. So we look afterwards to see that there is fluid actually flowing through the hole that we make. And in the long term, the ventricles may come down slightly, and the patient begins to walk better. So we're just getting a feel for the opening of the balloon and the closing of the balloon and making this whole. Expand again. Excellent.
Another question?
Yes?
What are the tissues involved in the surgery?
What are the tissues involved in the surgery?
Excellent question. So what's at the floor of the third ventricle? Actually, all around us is an area called the hypothalamus. This controls the endocrine. Okay. Excellent. Blow that. The endocrine control of the brain, many of the basic functions of the brain, how you eat, when you stop eating, your what we call the autonomic nervous system. It's a very essential part of the brain. The area that we're making the hole in, however, is a thin membrane and has very, very little function. That's why we choose to make the hole at this particular site. But all around us are basic functions of the brain in this third ventricle. And right at the bottom of the screen at 6 o'clock is something called the mammillary bodies, which is involved in the emotional and memory circuits of the brain. So we don't want to touch those either.
Okay, your question?
Complications could arise from having the surgery done.
What are the possible complications that could arise from having the surgery?
The most concerning complication is a bleed from a large vessel. Sometimes we have bleeds which cause a little bit of redness, and sometimes we have to stop and irrigate and so forth. But there are large vessels here. If there's a large bleed, we could cause a stroke, and that's what we want to avoid the most.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Luciano. We're getting ready to close and continue on with the program. We really appreciate you and your surgical staff for allowing us to do a mini distance learning with the students and the audience today. And we will be talking later, and we wish you and the patient well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. But this is an example. This is an example of what we can do if we had longer time. One of the things that we've also done this with open heart surgery. It allows the students to ask questions. We integrate health and wellness. What brought the patient to surgery could have been avoided. And it gives the students an opportunity to really bring real world meaning to what they're learning in the classroom, and allows us to collaboratively teach with teachers in a meaningful way that adds value at the end of the day. It's not about the broadband connection, it's what the value of what that connection will bring to learning and to the future of our region.
Thanks, Roz. Thank you very much to the students. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Well, that's not the way I learned in science class. Wow. That's really, really amazing. And of course, it doesn't take much to let one's imagination begin to work, that if we can do this between the Cleveland Clinic, which happens to be just 4 or 5 blocks down the street, and students here who are on stage using networks, we can look to improve STEM education all across Northeast Ohio. And if we actually heard what Blair Levin said, this is really about building out broadband infrastructure for the whole country, so that, as Roz just finished saying, it's not about the infrastructure, but what it can enable. And all across the country, we know the huge challenges that are associated with education, relevant education for the 21st century. And certainly a huge challenge. And we thank Roz for her pioneering efforts and leadership in this area, as well as to all of our colleagues at the Cleveland Clinic, and especially thanks to the students for participating today in a kind of model demonstration of using the network to actually make relevant and meaningful science come to life. During Blair's talk, he indicated that together GigU had managed to catalyze a number of major new initiatives across the country. One of them that you may recall him speaking about was the identification and partnership with the private sector in stimulating as much as $200 million in private funding to take the kind of work that we've been doing in Cleveland, at Case Western Reserve, in the beta blocks that Blair referred to, and actually replicate them and scale them all across the country. Cities like Seattle, cities like Chicago, regions like the area in the Research Triangle, all working to figure out how to build out broadband networks to actually attend to STEM education, job creation opportunities, and many, many other objectives that are meaningful and contextual to that region or to that city. The origins of that partnership between GigU and the private sector obviously span a significant effort by Blair and his colleagues to reach out to the private sector. I wanted the audience here and those who are watching online to get a chance to meet and listen to one of the partners that Blair Levin and the GigU community has identified. Mark Ansberry actually is the founder and CEO of Gigabit Squared. Didn't have to go too far to ask Mark to join us. I actually had to ask him to stay home on Friday because Mark's from Cleveland Heights. And Mark, Gigabit Squared, in partnership with GigU, is taking on a national profile of partnerships between the private sector and university communities in figuring out how to attend to the equation that Blair shared so that other communities can begin to replicate and scale the engagements that we're beginning to see this morning. And with that, I'd like to invite Mark Ansberry to join me on the stage. Thanks, Mark. Got your clicker?
Perfect, thank you. First of all, thank you all, and Lev, and as you're already seeing, he does a wonderful effort here with this Gigabit Breakfast, now number 2, and really challenging our minds and showing us what we can do and what we're doing today and what is in the art of the possible. So I have to ask a question this morning, and the question really I'm asking, and it kind of follows along with what Blair discussed earlier, is what kind of environment are we going to have? If we're at a Gigabit Breakfast, are we going to be rationed? Or are we going to have all you can eat? And when you see the demonstrations, you see the kinds of applications that are being used, we would like to have an environment that really becomes an enabler to innovation, that really opens the doors to not only have the technology just in the surgical theater, just in the environment there, but extend that then to the schools, extend that to the libraries, extend that into the home. So this becomes part of our practice in our daily life. So why do we really care? And what we found and what we're finding in the United Nations, who has actually established broadband as a core initiative for emerging countries, and what we're seeing internationally in Europe and in Asia, the rapid growth of gigabit capacity and gigabit networks, is that they do have impact. They have impact on the direct growth of the gross national product. They actually have indirect impact in that growth. And we're seeing employment growth. We're seeing actually, the creation of jobs as a result of having this kind of technology enabled and available. But we're also seeing great advantages in the public good. We're seeing growth and advantages of creating qualitative healthcare, extending that out. We're creating opportunities for young minds to learn new things, to take part and change their lives, and also change our society as part of having this kind of technology available. But how are we really doing here in the United States? And Blair gave us some stats. We're not doing so well. We're kind of average. We're not taking a leadership role. We're not really showing the rest of the world what could be done. But we could. We have that opportunity, and we are seeing points of opportunity through Google and others that are starting to demonstrate, but as also Blair said, we need a bunch of communities to participate. If we want to see innovation, and we want to enable that innovation to work, we need a larger number of communities to really participate and engage in developing these kinds of capacities. So we really think we can do better. And in the words of Gretzky, a good hockey player knows where the puck is. But, when you're a great player, really knows where it's going to be and is there when it's ready. So we may not be ready for gigabit capacity, today. We may not have the belief that the applications are there. We might be rationed because, you have no immediate need for it. But if we want to be a great nation, we have to start thinking ahead and making the infrastructure and the resources available. And why? Because things around us are happening. Cloud computing, we have enterprise communications, virtual mobility, everything's expanding around us. And we're creating this great digital infrastructure over here, but then we're not really giving everybody access and availability to all of that. So the wonderful demonstrations you're getting here are really limited to a small group of people. There's this whole digital divide, and the other side, a group that does not have access to this kind of capability or these kinds of demonstrations. And we're creating a digital divide across the US. And really what's happening to us in society is we have now all these technology vendors building devices, building applications, using the cloud. We really have new technologies and the idea of bring your own device, plug it into the cloud, use it for work, use it for school, use it for home use, and we're just really starting to create this massive flood of applications and devices and services. And as a nation, we're becoming more multitaskers. We're using more devices, using more applications, and we're using those all simultaneously. And you can see, even from the demonstrations here, the idea of a surgeon actually doing the work, the idea of students participating. You can imagine that they would have their own devices, they'd have their own research that they might be doing simultaneously. And all these require capacity and bandwidth to be able to work. And what's happening is that the demand is growing faster than the supply. The demand for this is, in the traffic, and what we're beginning to see now is that we're seeing 50% growth, and in the mobile networks, we're seeing 2 times multiple growth. And so the increasing demand for capacity is now getting into the exabytes. It's growing. It's growing exponentially, and even it's more logarithmic. But the increasing demands today and tomorrow we're seeing in the US and Western Europe as being still the leaders in demand in the real utilization, but our systems are still not following along. And as we see cloud computing and we see the services growing, we see the access through devices and this concept of bring your own device and developing new applications, the need for greater bandwidth exists. And what's happening when we go out and speak to a lot of the communities around the country, what we're finding is that the bandwidth demands don't meet the business needs. We do a lot of work in tech parks, we do a lot of work in educational centers and in innovation areas, and though they might have access to capacity and bandwidth, the community around them doesn't. And that's a great challenge if we're going to try to promote innovation and growth and commercialization, and we're going to try to promote a better learning environment, a better healthcare environment. We need to get these services out into the community and outside of our universities. Share what the universities have, share what people who have capacity with the others that don't have that today. And test beds are great. That's where we are today. We have a number of test beds in the US. But we don't have any kind of real strategy. We don't have any kind of growth plan. And much as you heard from Blair, overbuilding of the past is not happening. The investors are not investing in rebuilding that infrastructure. We have to find new ways to make it work. We have to change the math. We have to change the relationships. And as Blair also said, the idea of a social compact. We need to really say, if this is something we want to do, we have to create the opportunity and the environment and create a catalyst for making that happen. So what we decided to do, and looking at what GigU was doing, we saw the universities as an innovative platform, is we decided to say, okay, we need more demonstrations. We actually need more systemic and sustainable change. And to do that, we wanted to create a program. So we created the Gigabit Neighborhood Program. And the idea here is that we're going to take $200 million and we're going to seed 6 university communities to really develop fiber-to-the-home strategies and hybrid wireless strategies that promote more capability and make gigabit capacities available to a larger group within the community. Create that neighborhood where everyone has that level of access and the capability to innovate and the capability to change and have impact. Create a creative environment for that. And what we're focused on is really not just bandwidth. Bandwidth is an underlying infrastructure and an underlying need. What we're really focused on is identifying opportunities for growth, identifying, attracting and retaining the businesses in the communities, creating a sustainable future for smart IT, so more programs like this can mature and happen, and it's not an infrastructure is not a barrier, it's an opportunity. And we think to do this effectively, you have to create public-private partnerships. The old model of the carriers doing everything isn't really working. The way it started in the beginning is you had that social contract, and they said, we're going to go build and make it happen. That contract somehow isn't working in today's environment. So we have to change the model, and we think public-private partnerships are one way to facilitate that, and working with universities, working with communities, and other organizations. So we know where the puck is. The puck today is, there's these technologies, they're here, they're available. They can work if you have the right environment, you have the right infrastructure. It's great. We know that cloud computing, is opening the doors to new kinds of manufacturing, to the way we communicate, the way we interoperate, the way we learn. So we know where it is. But we also know that the puck's just about to hit us. What's happening with the available capacity and bandwidth today is that we're constrained. We really are being governed by the use and the capability. So, cell site carriers and mobility, all those mobile devices take big bandwidth. And they don't have that there. So what are they trying to do? Offload it to the other networks and Wi-Fi and other areas. So more people want to use your network because they don't have the capacity to deliver. So, and even in the past, little comic here, we used to talk about networks and the idea of it's switching and basically circuits will be handling big various packets back in 1998. And today, we're talking about the idea that we won't need switches and routers anymore. There'll be simple, virtual devices or virtual machines and things like OpenFlow and Genie and what US Ignite is trying to do in innovation and application. Those are the wave of the future. So the last question really is, where's the puck going to be? Are we going to be rationed? Or are we going to have an environment where all we can eat and we can see the kind of innovations that we're seeing, we can see the creation of new opportunities, new jobs, and we make America great, and we use technology as just a linchpin to help the real minds in this world develop new and creative ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. I'm Marv Schwartz, Chief Scientist for the Case Connection Zone, the Gigabit Fiber-to-the-Home Research Project of Case Western Reserve University, where we're studying how the ultra-high-speed network can be used to improve quality of life for the residents in 4 areas: health and wellness, home energy management, public safety, and STEM education at the high school level. Today we have 2 healthcare examples, a STEM education example, and the first public peek at a new technology we call connected collaboration. Heart failure is a costly chronic disease affecting many seniors. Readmissions, that's a readmission to the hospital within 30 days of a discharge, costs the Medicare system alone over $6 billion per year. Today, Dr. George Cacano, the chair of the Department of Family Medicine and Home Health Care for University Hospitals Case Medical Center and Vice Dean for Community Affairs and RPI for studying how to use our network to improve the health of the residents, is going to partner with Dr. Beth O'Toole, Director at Metro Health of the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Palliative Care, and Medical Director at Judson. Drs. Cacano and Toole will demonstrate using the video over the gigabit network at Judson in order to talk to a heart failure patient, reducing the possibility of a trip to the doctor's office, a trip to the emergency room, or a readmission to the hospital. George?
Thanks, Marv. Thank you. Thanks, Marv. I know Mildred is anxiously waiting to see a doctor, but just as a brief background, you've seen from Dr. Selman this morning and Dr. Luciano, if you need to get sick, Cleveland is the city. I strongly believe between UH between UH and the clinic, we have one of the best healthcare, if not the best in the country. Having said that, irrespective of what's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, or others, people in Cleveland, people throughout the country do not have access to healthcare. So what we're talking about here is not as fancy, as exciting. It's not high tech as Dr. Luciano and Selman had. Access to healthcare is not available in urban areas, in suburban areas. It's not available in rural areas. So the demo here is more to tell you how we, in the face of major shortage of physicians, just Ohio by 2020, we're looking at 5,000 deficit of physicians. So we're looking at the major shortage of docs, no access, more people getting insured. It's a perfect storm waiting to happen. And what I'd like to demonstrate is possibly technology be able to make us all more efficient. So we have Mildred here. Good morning, Mildred. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Dr. Connor. How are you?
I'm doing great. How's Mom doing?
Not doing too good this morning. I went grocery shopping to bring her some food, and I was picking her up to take her to visit some friends, and she's not even dressed this morning. She says she's very tired and just doesn't feel good, and I'm very worried about her.
I feel so bad about that. Mom has been in the hospital and rehab so many times this year. I really would hate her to go back to the hospital. Mildred, tell me what's going on, please.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm just tired, doctor. I just don't have any energy, and I feel bloated. I couldn't zipper my pants. I don't know.
How much can you do before?
I don't want to go back to the hospital, but I don't know what's wrong.
I mean, how much can you do before you get out of breath, Mildred?
I'm sorry?
How much can you do before you get short of breath?
Well, you know, yesterday I went to vacuum. I do that all the time. I got halfway through the room. It's not big, you can see. I had to sit down. I couldn't finish it.
Mildred, after you came from that rehab hospital, I sent you home with a monitor. Where's that monitor of yours? Remember you have that telemonitor?
Yeah, it's over here.
Tell me more about your blood pressure and your weight on that monitor. Has your weight gone up?
I don't know. You know, that goes someplace. I don't know where.
Her weight has gone up, doctor. It's gone up about 5 pounds.
She's probably going back into heart failure, Cindy. Please let me look at that medicine. And what kind of junk I see on that table? I mean, this is salt and fat we talked about. Tell me about this medicine. Have you been taking them, Mildred?
Oh, yeah, look. All kinds of them. I take them. Well, almost all. I'm not taking this one because it makes me go to the bathroom too much, and I'm tired of running there all the time, but I take all the rest.
And this one, I presume, is the water pill. Can I see that bottle, if you don't mind?
He wants to see it.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like you've been taking these pills. Mildred, I'm really concerned about you, and I hate to send you back to the hospital. Let me see if Dr. O'Toole and I work closely together at Judson. I'll see if she's available maybe to do a home visit on you, and then maybe hopefully today. Let me check up with Dr. O'Toole first to see if she's available to see you at home today.
All right.
Hey, Beth? Hi, Beth. Do you hear me?
Oh, hello.
Hi, Beth.
Hello?
Good morning.
Now I hear you.
Good morning, Beth.
Good morning.
Beth, I need a favor. I have Mildred.
Yes,
Mildred is an older lady, has been in the hospital so many times for HF, just came from rehab. I'm really concerned that she's going back she's building up fluids, going back to an HF exacerbation. She has not been taking her diuretic, bunch of salty food on her table, and has not been using her telemonitor. I'd really appreciate if you can stop and check on her today. I really don't want her back to go to the hospital or the emergency room. Is that possible?
Sure, I can do that. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, I have Beth with you here on video if you want to just make the introduction, take it from there, and let me know what I can do from the hospital side.
Do you have the records yet from a skilled nursing facility?
I've gotten nothing. I mean, the last record I've got when she was in the hospital like 3 weeks ago or so.
Okay, I can check on that and then go see her.
Perfect. I mean, you'll be able to stop at our house today?
Yes.
Perfect.
Now, this is the lady we have on the screen?
Exactly.
Hi, I'm Dr. O'Toole.
Hello, doctor.
Would it be all right with you if I came to see you later today?
Oh, sure. Whatever he thinks.
Okay. Dr. Kakano and I will work together.
All right.
Thanks. Cindy and Mildred, Dr. O'Toole is going to stop by. She'll review your medicine. She's going to go one more time over all that food on that table. And hopefully, if you can adjust the medicine, I'll see you in the office later this week. This way, we can avoid sending you back to the hospital or the emergency room. We'll talk later next week. Thank you, Beth.
Okay, we'll talk later.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Are you still on? Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Great. Thanks, Dr. Kakano, and thanks, Dr. O'Toole, and thanks to the great folks from Judson. As Marv indicated, this is a sneak peek into our next connection zone. It's the nation's first gigabit network to all 136 suites at Judson Manor, working with the executive team at Judson and working with not only the medical faculty, also faculty in social work at Case Western Reserve, faculty in our sociology department, and also working with many other partners that Judson has and working on exercise classes for seniors and continuing lifelong education opportunities for them as well. This is not only the first project of its kind in the nation, thanks to the partnership with Mark Ansberry and Gigabit Squared, we were able to actually deploy some never-before deployed fiber optics. For anyone who knows the Judson Manor, you know that it's not a building that will blow over in a storm. It is built to last, and that's because of the amazing infrastructure in the building, which made it extraordinarily challenging from a technology perspective to bring in that infrastructure. So we're very pleased to not only bring it to the Judson community in partnership, but also significantly pleased to begin to think about the applications that are possible to continue to improve the quality of life, to keep residents in place at home, to be able to collaborate with one another, with their families, with healthcare providers, and many, many other interactions that are possible. Speaking of applications, the challenge in many ways is answering the question, once these networks are built, who will show up if there are no applications? And that really has been a challenge for those of us in the technology community, and it's a bit of a vicious circle. The decision to launch US Ignite, as I shared with you at the top of our time today, was really in gestation for a considerable period of time, led by a senior veteran networking leader who spent 40 years of his professional life working on building networks and in catalyzing and incentivizing people to actually take advantage of them. And when the challenge came before the country to figure out how to catalyze, and if you'll excuse the play of words, ignite, the imaginations of the country's great application developers, it wasn't hard for the administration to turn to Glenn Eckardt, who founded and is today the Chief Technology Officer of US Ignite. It wasn't that hard to bring Glenn to town because he too has some Cleveland roots. He is an alum of the Case Institute of Technology, and with the promise of a trip back to Geraces this afternoon, please join me in welcoming Glenn Reichert to the stage. Thank you.
Well, it is true. Cleveland is a very special place to me, both personally and professionally. So right above us in the concert hall is where I met my wife. And professionally, because Cleveland has the largest number of gigabit-enabled homes in America. It's really a leader in this way. And thanks to the Case Connection Zone, and thanks to One Community for operating with that, the largest number of active 1 gigabit connections in the United States is right here in Cleveland. There's other cities that have claims to having more fiber optic homes wired, but in terms of having them operational, right here is the place. And also the applications, which are really the important part. If we just have the gigabits, that's fun. But if you actually do important things in medicine, as you've seen in some of the demonstrations and talks this morning, that makes a significant difference. But I've never been to a gigabit breakfast. So, you know, what really is a gigabit? Well, gigabit breakfast, I was thinking, a bit, to those of you who know computers or who know networking, that's one of the things that's either a 1 or a 0, right? So, well, let's see. I do eat a lot of zeros in the morning. I think they're called Cheerios, right? So I was thinking, gee, how much would I have if I had a gigabit breakfast? Well, that would be 1 followed by all those zeros, toasted oats. And so I went and I got a box of Cheerios, and I went and I figured out it had 4,000 in it. I did that, of course, by counting them. And then I said, okay, so if there's about 4,000, and that, of course, would be a bit bigger if you counted the broken pieces, but I decided the broken pieces didn't count as much as the regular O's. So if you had that, how many boxes of cereal would we need in order to have a gigabit? And the answer is, each and every one of you is responsible for bringing 833 boxes in order to have a gigabit breakfast. So I want you to do that. Okay, so what is a gigabit? It's something, of course, that's a very big number. It allows us to do some important things. But I'm going to ask you a different question. Is a gigabit really enough? A lot of the things that we're seeing today in terms of visual presentations require more than a gigabit. If you take the uncompressed stream for high-definition television is 1.5 gigabits all by itself. And if we're going to go and be able to get the clicker to work properly, there we go. A medical image, DICOM is a standard for exchanging medical images, about 6 gigabits for medical images that would be moving and would be allowing us to look at things like the surgery this morning. A Red One camera, you may have seen some movies based on that, about 10 gigabits. And you heard earlier that there is a notion of 4K video. 4K video is the next step up, and that would run about 24 gigabits. 4K video is in the news right now. Toshiba announced a 4K set last week. It's very new, and it is supported by YouTube. Go to YouTube and look for 4K videos. I have nothing to watch them on, but if you do, I'd like to come visit you right after Geraci's so that I can go and see some of these 4K videos. So we're going to need at least a gigabit, right? We need at least that much. What will a gigabit stress if we actually have that gigabit? Well, it turns out there are a few things that it will stress. One is the internet routers that route these things that we use called packets that get us to websites and other places. And the other thing it's going to stress is transport to the distant clouds for the cloud computing, the things that answer you when you ask for your mail from Yahoo or Google. And let's take a look at each of those. Internet routers were designed in an era when the fastest speed you could get required you to switch 5 of these packets per second. But at a gigabit, you need to be able to deal with 75,000 packets per second. How hard could that be to do? Well, take a look at this. This is the standard for what an internet protocol packet header looks like. This isn't actually the complete story because the part in yellow shows lots of options that aren't even listed there. And it's got things that have to be changed. You know, there's a time to live count that has to be decremented and so forth. So processing these headers, 75,000 per second per thing coming into your network is just a huge effort. But there is a solution. The solution that we've got is that instead of switching a packet and looking at a header on each packet, is we just deal with an entire flow at once. Decreases the effort immensely. So the networks of the future will be doing things by flow, not by packet. And the end term for these things is software-defined networking, and it allows us to do some other things as well. But the bottom line for economics is an 80% reduction in cost for switching these things. That means that we'll much more economically switch these gigabit flows if we're using flow-based switching, using software-defined networking, than anything else. Okay, very good. The second one was the transport to the distant cloud. If you're transporting to a distant cloud and you're a provider, you need to go and pay the person upstream of you to be able to carry those bits. And for a gigabit, that charge will be a rock-bottom cost of $1,000 per month to transport a gigabit, and more likely costs are in the range of $2,000 to $5,000. So let's see here the math. Can I offer a gigabit connection to somebody's home if I have to pay upstream $1,000 to $5,000 to give it off to the distant cloud? The answer is, well, I'd better bet that people won't actually use the gigabit. That may not be the best bet to make. And in fact, I think the right solution is to move the cloud to your neighborhood. Clouds were put there because it was a cost-effective way of grouping the servers together, but at a gigabit, it makes much more economic sense to move that cloud to your own neighborhood. Keep the gigabits there local. So neighborhood cloud ideas, US Ignite racks, Genie racks, using standards are going to be the way I think we will deal with this issue. Now, this unencumbered gigabit will allow us to really make the applications happen. An unencumbered gigabit to what? Apps from the future. And you'll hear this phrase again this morning, I bet. Am I? Oh, good. You will hear that. These apps from the future will be made possible by the software-defined networking, the neighborhood clouds, and the gigabit to the end user. So let's talk about some of these apps from the future. One is you've seen some fabulous, fabulous video here this morning. The video that we have today is either high cost, because we've got very good compression that's relatively fast by getting fairly expensive Polycom, Tandberg, other kinds of video gear, or else it's kind of low quality, like you would get with Skype. But with a gigabit, you can change that equation. You can substitute the gigabit speed for the cost that would otherwise be required to get the high quality. So we have a new promise. The new promise in video is the capability of having a low cost, deployed anywhere and everywhere, including all those apartments at Judson, low cost but high quality at the same time by trading off and using the gigabit. And I think that will make video conferencing, instead of an experience where somebody else is on the other end, you will feel like you're actually there, a be there experience. Another good example, well, let's see. Anyone bought anything from the App Store? Well, you know, maybe you should save your money and get it from an app public library. Does that sound like a good idea? An app public library. So how about things like, I don't use Photoshop very often, but when I do want to use it, why can't I borrow it for a couple of hours from my app public library? That's possible with a gigabit and software-defined networking in a way that allows you to naturally use that. Or the second one there is people who are musicians know about Pro Tools. The A there is for AutoCAD. And that right-hand symbol is the symbol of the public app library in the Salt Lake City Library, my hometown. So it's very interesting. I can now check out Android apps right from my library. So kind of an app service. That'd be a cool application as well. And there's many more. Remote radiology, making a virtual supercomputer out of your community, personal sensor networks. I actually run a software-defined network in my home. Sim Center is an idea of taking and being able to respond to emergencies. There's just a number of things. Let me tell you a little bit about US Ignite. US Ignite is the organization trying to encourage the creation of these next generation applications. Applications that simply couldn't happen or be feasible on today's networks that are going to change things. US Ignite is a 501c3 public-private partnership. We work with the communities, including Research and Education, Genie, Mozilla, One Community, the CASE folks here. And these projects are intended to lay out the future for what gigabits, software-defined networking, and neighborhood clouds can do for America. And those are in public benefit areas, clean energy, education, healthcare, and so forth. Our goals are to have 60 next-generation applications over the next 5 years that are compelling and change the way that Americans live and work, thanks to the fact that we're employing these new technologies. We'd like to have 200 community test beds and be able to help demonstrate economic leadership in the United States based on these technologies. We have a lot of founding partners, including, as I've said, a number right here in Cleveland that I'm very proud to number among our members. Our ecosystem is rich. It involves folks doing research like Jeannie is doing, folks who are working with the open source community like Mozilla is doing, folks at CASE who are doing research. The One Community effort here in Cleveland are all part and important parts of this ecosystem. It's a very exciting time. US Ignite is trying to make the future happen for you now, and a gigabit may not be enough. So I wish you exciting good luck with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you. Pat and Peter Holland are longtime residents, property owners, and property managers in our first beta block on Hessler. As a bit of interesting trivia, Peter was one of the Star Trek girls in the pilot episode, which was filmed here in Cleveland. I've also learned that it's their 28th wedding anniversary today, and so I'd like to wish him a happy anniversary. Dr. Peter Whitehouse is professor of neurology here at CASE, a co-founder of the Intergenerational School, very innovative school in Cleveland, and a strategic advisor at the University of Toronto. And most importantly, he's Peter's neurologist, who has been seeing her regularly over video in the CASE connection zone. And Dr. Whitehouse and the Hollands have graciously agreed to let us see a live health coaching session over that video. Peter, thank you.
Good morning. It's always great to see you.
Good morning.
We're going to be continuing our conversation this morning in a somewhat different than usual fashion because there are about 300 people looking over my shoulder and a few hundred or thousand others listening to us out there in the web. But so thank you very much for agreeing to participate to this somewhat different session. I thought I'd start the way we usually do, which is to summarize a little bit where we are in the conversation, at least from my perspective, and then open it up to the two of you to share a reflection on where you think we are and the questions we want to address today, And of course, we do have the limitation that we only have 10 minutes usually, rather than our usual hour. So is it okay with you if I just start by summarizing it and then turning the conversation over to you?
Sure, go ahead.
Great. And by the way, before we leave the topic, congratulations on your anniversary. That's great.
Thank you.
We started this process in November, and I'm going that far back just to bring the folks listening to the process. So the process is called brain health coaching. And it really is a process that's not the standard neurological practice, as you know, although I do see you as a neurologist, but a process designed to help you create your vision for the future based on the strengths that you had. So we start back in building a future based on what we talked about way back in November, which is the things that you did. I didn't know you were part of Star Trek, but I knew you were very much engaged in your community in Beechwood, around this Cleveland area, that you went out and got your education, that you had family challenges we've shared, which we don't have to share here. After we, though, focused on your strengths, we went to the challenges you're facing today with your memory. And we're now in the process of imagining what you're going to do together in relationship to the future life that you have together. So perhaps I can turn it over to you to see if you have comments, reflections about where you think we are in the process of sharing this story that's unfolding in your life. Pitta, can I ask you to just see if there are any reflections or questions you have?
Well, first of all, it's the older you get, the harder it is to recognize that you might be older and might be getting even older. So there's a reluctance to embrace some of the wonderful things that we can establish and do in a time that we have left together. And we're lucky that we're both retired from pretty ambitious careers and have a little bit of money that we can feel reasonably comfortable, at least in sustaining our lifestyle, which has been pretty precious. I'm finding it remarkable to realize that I don't have to do anything. And in both good and bad sense, the consequence of that is I make up things I have to do, which may not be the best use of my time. I think my husband can comment on that.
Well, Peter, there certainly has been some changes with Peter's memory issues. As you know, we manage some rental real estate here on Hessler Road, and the memory problems have created some interesting challenges in just actually remembering who the tenants are and what their names are and that sort of thing. So I think we're beginning to think about the possibility of changing our venue here to a situation where we're more of an independent living type situation. And as you're maybe aware, and what I heard earlier in the presentation today, we have been exploring, looking at Judson Manor, and I was very happy to learn that you now have broadband connection there, similar to what we have with the Case Connection Zone. And that was high on my criteria list, was being able to continue to meet with you and do other things that we do with the broadband. So that's good news for us and a gold star for Judson.
Well, I think we are fortunate in this community that you can contemplate a possible change into where you're living and still maintain relationships and use the gigabit to do that. Pitta, these are really personal challenges that people do face as they're getting older. As you said, you've worked very hard as the landlord in that community, and it is difficult to maintain all those responsibilities as you get a bit older. Your husband's raised this issue of a possible move. Do you feel comfortable speaking about that for a few minutes here?
Am I comfortable about thinking about making a move to Judson? No, I'm not really comfortable about it. I like my neighborhood, and I like my position in my neighborhood. But I may not be able to fulfill the obligations that make me like it, and so I'm trying to embrace options with a brighter attitude.
I think that's it's a very difficult decision to undertake. What, Pitta, in this relationship that we've developed, which I should add is both with in-person visits as well as these telehealth visits, what is it about this broadband, this ability to communicate with your neighbors, with other people around the country, with me, that's offered you something in your life, do you think, that helps you think about aging in a different way? Is that a hard question? What do you think about this broadband? Your husband commented about how he enjoyed the opportunity to go to a place where broadband was present. How about you?
I haven't been communicating with my neighbors because old habits die hard, and I like to go visit them, and I like to have them come with us.
But
I recall a number of occasions where there were emergencies in the neighborhood where the availability of this communication would have made reparations much more feasible in a short period of time. And I think from just the standard of the situation of trying to make sure that everyone's well-being is
it's nice.
Everyone's well-being is addressed.
Nice to see Omar as part of the family.
I think it will enhance people's comfort level in being in the neighborhood and not just accessible to the hospital, but that the hospitals are accessible to us. That we are accessible to.
Omar has given me an idea. I think we have to do broadband pet therapy for people too. Pitta, can I ask you one other question, which I know we've talked about before? You participated here because I think you feel you're a part of this community and want to contribute.
I think he's a great contributor. He's got a wonderful tale.
Absolutely. Well, we just have a couple of seconds left, so I wanted to thank you and apologize for the shortness of this particular opportunity to interact, and I'll look forward to a longer time next time. But I know I speak for everybody to thank you for spending the time with us this morning, and again, I look forward to the next time.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pitta. All of the collaboration that we've been sharing today would not have been possible without the leadership and the technology of One Community. One Community is our regional internet service provider, but it's a whole lot more than that. It's also a significant thought leader, not only here in the region, but across the country. The co-founder of One Community and its president and CEO is Scott Rourke, and I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Scott to the stage.
So I wanted to kind of take the lens and pull back a little bit from where we've been talking about today. It's been very exciting visions about applications and uses and how it can change lives. I've been thinking deeply about a little bit different paradigm, which is really how do we start changing society? How do we scale this? So I love the applications. I live for the applications. That's my background. But how do we change society? So we all saw some power today that few people have seen, experienced, and have the opportunity to do something about it. So I want to pull back a little bit, and what I want to talk about today is a roadmap to a smart region. So you heard today about perhaps Cleveland having a competitive advantage, or this region having a competitive advantage to outperform other markets with this broadband, which is now the platform for new technologies. Actually, I'll get back to my net here. Oh, that's it. All right, so I guess what I'll start with is this roadmap to a smart region is really, it's about economics, and you heard Blair talk a little bit about the economics in broadband. Well, the most powerful force in economics I want to talk about today, it's called the X factor. So the X factor is actually about the most important piece of driving growth, any kind of economy. It's not about capital. I was surprised. It's not about capital inputs. It's not even about labor inputs. It is this X factor. The X factor is not a reality show. It's a different kind of reality. In 1987, Dr. Solow came up with the Nobel Peace Prize for demonstrating that 80%, up to 80% of our GDP growth over the history of time came from the adoption of new technologies. So what does this mean? So we've got growth. We all want growth. We don't have enough growth here in this marketplace and certainly others in the United States. How do we get this new technology? How do we create an atmosphere of innovating more frequently, focusing more resources on innovation? So broadband, obviously, we've talked about being the key in these new technologies. Broadband's the platform for these new technologies. As an example, the biggest growing sector and now the largest sector in market cap over finance, over the other sectors, is actually information technology and telecommunications. Relatively new fields. Certainly fueled by high growth. You've certainly seen Apple and Google and the likes. So you've got this platform for innovation, but as was stated earlier, what are we going to do with it? It's there. Who's going to show up? How are we going to use it? Well, broadband, let's talk a little bit more specifically about broadband being the platform. Well, soon we're going to have smart devices. You certainly have some now, but soon your coffee maker will actually sense when you're waking up and it's going to start brewing. Pretty cool. Soon, when we've got in senior homes, when your loved ones, your grandparents perhaps, your parents, when they fall down and don't get up, that will be derived by sensors and there'll be alerts. So we've got a new world we need to start thinking about that's enabled by broadband. There's also, imagine the economic opportunities if you're the lead inventor of those, and fueled by efforts like US Ignite and others in this great broadband marketplace that we've got here in this marketplace. So let me catch up now. So the beauty of technology is really, and few people understand this, it's the ability to scale to huge audiences at almost no incremental cost. The best example is probably email, whether you email one person or millions of people or 10 millions of people. That's really the power of technology. That's why it can be so transformative, especially when you think about it in social settings. So the way I describe it is it's kind of, we're trying to move towards value. So we've got data at the bottom there. We've got lots of data. People are capturing lots of data. They're maybe not sharing lots of data. But what we need to do is we need to connect people to broadband infrastructure. We need to connect the databases. We need to start sharing it. And we need to move up this value chain from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. That's how we start changing society, when we start being a smart community and start working together across our sectors, sharing the data, and actually making it actionable. And that's what makes us productive. And in turn, when we're more productive, we're able to shift more resources towards innovation. We're starting to see that here in the universities, which certainly have gotten increasingly interested in innovation themselves and commercialization and tech transfer. We've seen that in our healthcare systems. So a local example, I believe it was Blair mentioned big data earlier today. So big data is all this data that's hidden out there somewhere, and not everybody knows what to do with it. Well, to bring meaning to it, we need computing. So fortunately, there's huge computing resources, and we've mentioned cloud, which just means it's plugged in and over the internet, we're getting computing capabilities. So an example of smart use of data, getting smart, is a local company called Explorus. They've worked with 12 healthcare systems, including our local ones. They got 14 million medical records, and they started analyzing it. And as you can see in the slide here, I won't read it, but in just 3 months, they were able to replicate what took over a decade previously at a fraction of the cost with a vastly increased quality level because of the sample size. So very exciting company. It's a Cleveland-based company, and again, it's one of the leaders in big data. And big data to the healthcare industry is about a value of about $300 billion a year. So back to this societal, non-trivial societal issue. So the vision is not just doing the applications from a bottom up, but how do we start looking at our community more broadly? How do we look at our key sectors here? How do we start instrumenting them with these systems, with this data, and moving them up to knowledge and wisdom, and being smart about how we deliver our social services, our health services, being more efficient, and then again, pushing the investment levels, the saved investment levels, the capacities, up to the innovation cycle. So really what we're trying to do is we start with really connecting them to a broadband network. In Northeast Ohio, we're lucky in that we've got thousands of public sector entities already plugged into the One Community Network, and you've seen that many folks here today are doing great things on top of it, great programming on top of it. We've got to foster collaboration. We've got to start coordinating systems, so we need to actually get different siloed organizations and departments. We need to move these applications from an individual level or a departmental level or an organizational level to actually looking at systems. Two examples might be our knowledge system, which includes education, but is business at the table on our workforce discussions? Is that leadership there? Another example might be our innovation systems. Are all these guys thinking about how they can support innovation? So we're talking about the competitiveness of our region powered by this broadband, and the sky's the limit, but if we connect everybody, plug them all in, and start coordinating them, we can actually start driving productivity and increased innovation. So a quick example would be healthcare. The healthcare system, I'll spare you of going through the whole supply chain of healthcare. It's obviously got some bureaucracy to it. Just the payments alone, if you've been to a healthcare system recently, can be quite challenging. What's neat is if we can automate that, so we already lead in quality, what if we were to automate that, become more productive, and invest in innovation? So we're starting to certainly increase our focus on innovation, but let me give you a couple examples. You saw examples today of telemedicine. So what if we were to take telemedicine and make that our core? So what if we were to actually deliver these systems and take our great healthcare capacities and actually broadcast them over the internet globally? We actually could make healthcare services our biggest export. So lots of opportunities. We need to coordinate, build capacities, and again, focus on innovation. Another local example is HealthSpot. So this is telemedicine. It's local. It was actually designed just minutes from here. It's actually telemedicine. You can deploy it anywhere. You plug it into broadband, and actually doctors from anywhere can actually come in and deliver services. What's important about this is that you can actually get cost down, for example, versus an emergency room visit that handles many of the things this can handle with these instrumentations and these doctors. The costs fall from over $1,000 down to about $50. Very disruptive technology, and it's coming our way. And again, Cleveland's already starting to do it, but we can certainly increase our focus. So again, getting back to the societal thing, what we want to do is we want to actually focus the systems on common outcomes. We want to connect them, align them, focus on those outcomes, use data, use broadband, use these systems to actually drive these outcomes. So it sounds like a great concept, but these systems are certainly not going to self-organize. And again, we certainly need business at the table. So the roadmap, taking it from concept to actually beyond, so engage leadership. So the first step on actually making this smart region is actually engaging leadership. So we've certainly got the broadband, but we need more leaders engaged in thinking about their organization and how they can actually step out of the silos, break it down, take the data, move it to knowledge, and actually be more productive, and all focus on these outcomes, which is namely the knowledge workers and innovation. Shared vision and aligned planning, again, planning outside our silos, but we also don't have technology in most of our region's plans. That's really important. The tech sector is actually leading. We need to actually share the leadership and start getting everybody to think about how can technology inform our decisions and how do future technologies, how are they going to impact us favorably and unfavorably. Committed public-private partnerships. Again, the best example is we certainly need tech companies in the conversation, and we need business leaders. So again, workforce, we need to connect workers into these systems. We need to map them right into the businesses. It's going to turn project-based. It's got to flow. It's got to be great. And who has more to benefit than businesses from being more innovative as a region and better getting talent into their businesses? And then lastly, the infrastructure. One community's expanded dramatically. We now are in 25 counties. We go all the way from Toledo down to Columbus, out to Youngstown. And we've connected thousands of public sector entities, and now we're working with the private sector to start building stuff on top of it. So a great innovation opportunity, a great opportunity to be more productive, more innovative. And I think really the question is, can we take advantage of this opportunity? Will anybody come up and actually use this? And that's really why we're here today, building interest in this and capacity in this. So what we need to do is we actually need to go back to this chart and say engage leadership. So I'm hoping today to get some volunteers on how we can start working on this plan for a smart region. We certainly led back in the day in the Industrial Revolution. We have a unique opportunity now to lead in the knowledge revolution, the information revolution, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks.
So many of you have heard the term distance learning. And I'll tell you that we don't like that term because you've just heard all morning about what? About connections. And what we've done is we've thought about this a lot and decided that a much better term is connected learning. So what we want to do is we want to bring great instructors and great students together through this technology. So I hope you'll all begin using the term connected learning and forgetting the term distance learning. It's not about distance. And I thank Lev for that insight. Ewan Alexander is the chair of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at CASE and the faculty director of the Great Lakes Energy Institute. From 2005 to 2010, he was the director of the National Center for Space Exploration Research. And through the courtesy of Principal Carol Lockhart and science teacher John Fellenstein, we're fortunate to have 6 students with us from the Cleveland Early College High School, here to help us demonstrate STEM education with a remote instructor and a local class. The Cleveland Early College High School also should be recognized. It's one of the top 10 high schools in the state, and it is an inner city high school in Cleveland. I think that's fabulous. So with that, we'll just turn this over to Professor Alexander. Ewan?
Thank you, Marv. Good morning. Welcome to you all. And a special welcome to our high school participants who've agreed to join me in this demonstration this morning. I've been asked to talk for a few minutes about sustainable energy and emphasize its importance. And I've had quite a bit to do with energy. The background behind me today shows a piece of Lake Erie. I've always wanted to look like I'm walking on water, so this is a first. And what I'd like to do this morning is put in perhaps context some of the research you might have heard about at CASE and talk specifically about the importance of energy and the importance of sustainable energy. So first off, energy is fundamentally important to us, human beings. It's fundamental to our condition. How we extract it, how we distribute it, and how we use it will really determine in the future our quality of life. Now, we human beings have been using energy in different forms ever since we've been walking around on this planet, starting with muscle power, really powered by food, starting with heat, which we needed from fires to give us warmth, and then growing slowly through effective use of mechanical power, leverage, water power, eventually steam power, which was really given to us by coal, being an extremely important thing. It really revolutionized the shipping industry around the world. It also, later on, gave us a basis for producing electrical power. Along came oil, and oil really revolutionized, again, transportation, taking away coal from ships, having worldwide shipping powered by fuel oil, and also giving us the automobile and effective means of transportation around the world. We've also had, since the 50s, nuclear power, adding a little bit in some countries to our overall electrical power consumption. Now, when I said that it's fundamental to our human condition, we use energy everywhere. We use it in industry to work hard for us, to produce the things that we use every day. We use it in commerce. We use it in lighting in stores. We use it residentially, anything from keeping our place warm, keeping it lit, and using power to eat. We also use it with the fancy electronics that we have, and we keep getting better, and we keep having more of a thirst for these kinds of gadgets. So as the population of the world has exploded, particularly over the last 100 years, global energy consumption for transportation, for residential use, for just doing work in industry and commerce has increased incredibly. This has put stresses, and certainly we anticipate stress, we see stress, actually on our energy supplies, our sources, because traditionally we've relied on things that are not, in the very long term, renewable, such as coal, oil, gas, and so on. And even nuclear power ultimately is not renewable in that sense, at least not from fission. And so we start to get concerned, since we rely on energy so heavily. It's our number one concern, really is a number one concern, because if we start running out, or if energy starts getting too expensive, we're going to have to modify our way of life, perhaps, in ways that we don't want to. We'd like to decide how we modify our way of life rather than the conditions around us. So having a sustainable, reliable energy supply becomes important. But if, as I pointed out, we rely on resources that at some point may become so scarce they're too expensive to extract or simply just run out, what are we going to have as alternatives? Well, I like to look at the sun as the ultimate energy source. And I'll give you a couple I'll just tell you one thing about it that might start getting you thinking. And that is, more power reaches the surface of the earth than you really might imagine. For example, in 1.5 hours, the amount of energy from the sun that hits the Earth's surface is equivalent to the entire planet's energy consumption, and that's everything from transportation fuels to electricity. The entire planet's energy consumption in the year of 2001. It's on the order of 475 exajoules, if that means anything, and we can think about putting that number in context. And so far more energy comes from the sun than we ever think about using. Of course, the challenge is how to get it affordably, and how to get it reliably. The technology that we use to do it has to be reliable. We have to be able to afford it. We don't really want it to impact us adversely economically. Other candidates exist. It's related to solar power in the sense that without the sun, we wouldn't really have the climates that we have. But wind power is also a candidate. Both of those things, though, are going to be regionally dependent. There are some parts of the world where perhaps putting up solar panels to extract power won't be as effective as others. And I think there are some obvious examples, like if we go to the further northern climes and we compare them to desert regions towards the equator and above the equator immediately, that's an obvious example. So figuring out how to make these things reliable is important. But there's another thing that we need to think about, and that's as our population has exploded and become extremely large. I mean, I think we're upward of 6 billion people on the Earth and climbing right now. We have to remember that as human beings, we've evolved from a species that had, hundreds of thousands of years ago, little impact on the planet, to one that really has and can and does exert a geological force. We affect the environment around us. And so we have to start being concerned about how we extract energy and use it, and determine whether or not that's having a positive or a negative effect on the environment around us. And I think we're all very aware of the growing concern that in fact our current state is having a negative effect on us. And we need to start thinking about how to turn that around. It's part of our responsibility to do that. So combined with our thinking about how do we get a reliable, sustainable energy supply that we can keep relying on, how do we ensure that we are not adversely affecting the environment? Now, there's lots of technologies that are in play, particularly in the wind and solar area, And they seem to be the go-to things for renewable energy sources that countries around the world are looking at right now. Certainly it's the source of a lot of attention for research at places like Case Western Reserve University. And so what I'd like to do now really is, rather than, I can talk for several hours, as many of my colleagues in the audience know about this subject, but I'll refrain from that and listen really to the questions from the high school students to try to learn from you what you're thinking about and want to know about in terms of energy and sustainable energy, locally, for the country, even globally.
So, who would like to ask a question?
You mentioned earlier the amount of energy received by the Earth's surface from the sun. Can you express this in terms of everyday things that we use that consume power?
Yeah, okay, so let me rephrase that, and then I'll use a little slide. In fact, I have a little picture here which will help me come up somewhere on my left in a second, and that'll help me put things in context. But if we look at the amount of sun that's actually the power from the sun, so that's the energy per unit time. If we look at the power from the sun that's coming to the Earth's surface, we receive on the order of let's say 90 petawatts. So that's 90,000 terawatts. What's a terawatt? Well, 15 terawatts characterizes, on average, what the power consumption around the world is. So my favorite thing is to say watt. What is a watt? Well, a watt is the power. So it's the amount of energy per unit time that is used, say, to power your laptop. Okay, so that's 1 watt. A toaster, your typical toaster, is about 1,000 watts, a kilowatt. Then we get up to, I've got a little picture of it's really sort of to acknowledge my dad. It's a Supermarine Spitfire. It was an aircraft used in the Second World War, and it takes about 1 megawatt of power. Now, a typical large coal-fired power station would be about 250 megawatts. So that's quite a few toasters and not an insignificant number of those aircraft. And our typical nuclear power station in this country, I mean, they're around a gigawatt. Okay, so now we're really getting a lot of watts up here. And then when you go up to the next order, which is a terawatt, so that's 10 to the power 12 watts, you start realizing that's a lot of laptops and still a large number of toasters, like 1,000 billion toasters. So that should put it in perspective for you, in terms, I hope anyway, in terms of the power that we get. The sun's power is another couple of orders of magnitude greater than that. As I said, we use globally, the power consumption is around 15 terawatts. And the sun is giving us 94,000 terawatts. So, you know, the big thing is how do we get at that, and how do we get at it affordably and reliably? Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question.
Wind is variable. How will we ever get all of our energy from wind? And can this energy be stored?
Okay, well, you've made a good point. Wind is variable. Actually, solar is variable too. Obviously, there's night and day. And wind can vary hour by hour, minute by minute. And so any power generated by wind fluctuates on several different time scales. That's got its own set of issues. And to answer your second question that follows up, it's variable. Can we ever get all our power from it? I'd say it's very unlikely that we would even try to get all our power from wind, because there are places where there's very good, relatively reliable wind. In other words, it blows most of the time. It's relatively predictable. I don't know if any of you ever read anything about or been to a place called Aruba, which is off the coast of Venezuela, but it seems like the wind is always blowing there between about 15 and 25 miles an hour all the time. And that would be an ideal place to put up wind turbines and actually rely on them locally to produce power. But globally, or even nationally, maybe 10% perhaps of your power, perhaps 20%. Certainly in this country, the Department of Energy has a lofty goal of, by 2030, they would like to have 20% of all our electrical power generated by wind. But many people think that that's a tough goal. There's lots of technological hurdles that have to be met, and those technological hurdles also have to meet rather tough economic constraints. We have to make it cheap. It has to be competitive with existing things that we can point to, like natural gas, like coal, that are relatively cheap in comparison. And so that's the challenge facing our research. So no, we won't always we won't go for them as the sole source of our energy supply. Your last part of the question, can it be stored so it's connected to the variability of wind? In principle, yes, it can. And there's research going on around the country right now, including actually in some of our labs at Case Western, to try to figure out how to store electrons on a utility scale. You know, we know we can do it in batteries for a car, but when you start having to power 100,000 homes and store enough electricity so you can meet those power demands for 4 or 5 hours or 6 hours or so, that starts to get more challenging. But there certainly seems to be hope on the horizon, given what we're learning in our laboratories, that those challenges can be met. Now, maybe we won't meet them, but perhaps you, as students, will be getting to meet them by the time you pass through that stage in your career, should you choose science or engineering, which of course we hope you will.
Thank you, Ewan. Thank you very much. Thank you, students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the students and to Ewan. Very much appreciate it. We are on the last lap. We've got a couple more brief talks and one demonstration that we hope that you'll find time to stick around for, to give you a sense of really some path-breaking work that is going on. I want to introduce a friend and colleague who's been to Cleveland a couple of times to share with us work that he's working on across the nation. You heard Glenn refer to the work of GINI, which is actually a next-generation network. We've been talking all day about networks that are on the immediate horizon. GINI, in some ways, is really a project that is evolving really in the research community first, very much like the internet as we've known it, or started in the research community. Chip Elliott is the project director. Indeed, he's also the PI for GINI. He's based in the Boston area. He's been working in these and other complex networking programs for nearly 30 years, and is in many ways the architect of what might well be the next internet as we know it, or actually as we're going to find out about. So please join me in welcoming Chip Elliott.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Lev, and it's really good to be back in Cleveland again. I'm here on behalf of the GINI project, which is sponsored by the National Science Foundation. And I'd like to begin by posing a question to us all, really. What is it like to live in the future? You know, are we all going to be wearing jet packs 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Are we going to be eating, you know, stuff that's grown in big vats, or are the buildings going to be plastic? You know, what is it like to live in the future? Well, it's kind of hard to predict. I mean, the world is littered with predictions about what the future is going to be like. And we could spend quite a bit of time here, if we wanted to, talking about what it's like to live in the future. But I have something I really believe, which is that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Make it yourself. A very wise fellow said this, Alan Kay. And Alan Kay has spent pretty much his lifetime predicting the future, actually inventing the future. He started doing this in the late 60s when he dreamt up this kind of concept that you'd be able to have a computer you can carry around, and you could probably type documents on it or something. Probably you could store all your photos on it, maybe your music. Maybe all the world's encyclopedias would be inside this thing. So this was kind of his idea in 1968, and he started building it. Remember, this is the time, if you're old enough, you remember there were 3 television channels at this point. The phones were all black and so on. So here's this wild man who has the idea, hey, this is what's going to be, and he started building it. Okay, but that's kind of not the question. The question is, what is it like to live in the future? What's it like? Well, the answer kind of varies depending when you are. So if you're about 1 million BC, that's not the exact date. You know, the future is kind of a sharp stick, and boy, we get to cook and eat our meat now, and it tastes a lot better. So that was kind of the future then. 1830, plus or minus, in my current hometown of Arlington, Massachusetts, the ice technology was extremely high technology. You may not think this, but there was a huge wave of innovation about cutting up ice, transporting it, storing it. Ice from Arlington, Massachusetts, our little pond in Arlington, Massachusetts, was shipped all through the Caribbean. There were storehouses all through the Caribbean. That's where they got their ice from. And in fact, most of British India was supplied by ice out of Massachusetts. This huge web of transporting ice to the tropics, storing it for years, and so forth. In fact, Queen Victoria's ice that she served to all her guests and she used herself always came from a little town just north of Arlington. Okay, let me give a little quiz to us all. During about one generation in New Haven, Connecticut, I was reading a book about this, they acquired 5 new technologies: electricity, gas, trolley cars, running water, and telephones. So my quiz to you is, what order, if you're living in New Haven in this time, what order do these things come into your life? So which one is first? Gas. Which one is second? Water. Third? Trolley cars. Fourth and fifth? Electricity, then the phone. Okay, the answer is actually kind of interesting, and if you put yourself in that position, you realize, hey, the past was a little bit different than I thought. Gas was first, then the telephone, then trolley cars, electricity followed, and last but not least, running water. Okay, so you can see why the phone companies and the trolleys had their own electrical system. There wasn't an electrical system there. And you think, hey, when people were using electric lights, most of them didn't have running water. Okay, very interesting order that things happened in. Here's another little bit of living in the future. This is a book I love. Jack Kerouac, one of the original beatniks, went to visit Gary Snyder in Berkeley, California, 1958. And this book is basically a transcript of staying there. They went camping together out in the Sierra Nevadas. And Jack Kerouac did it the usual way. He took his car, and he loaded the tent in the trunk, right, the army tent that he bought in surplus, with a bunch of shovels and about 2 cases of canned beans, right? So he's ready to go camping. Well, he's going with Gary Snyder, who lives in Berkeley, 1958. Gary doesn't have a car, but he has something Jack Kerouac has never seen before, which is a 10-speed bicycle. One of the few in the US. It was imported from Italy. He has a tent, but it's a really weird one. It's made out of nylon. You can put it on your back and carry it. And the food he brings? Tofu. So this whole book is kind of a record of a guy who's living in the present, Jack Kerouac, who just happens to be visiting this guy who's living, I don't know, 10, 15 years in the future, Gary Snyder. Kerouac is just totally floored by this. He's never seen anything like this in his life. And indeed, the future is kind of hard to predict, right? Who'd have thunk that tofu was the future? Okay, my own kind of childhood, and I know Glenn in particular was very active in these days. There were kind of a scruffy band of computer people who were hanging out, doing computer stuff. You know, they were just kind of doing things, trying things, and you know, you remember what computers were like in the old days. Well, somehow that started morphing with this thing called the ARPANET, which was this nationwide research network, covered the US. You can see how many campuses were in the ARPANET in those days. And the computer people and the ARPANET people started to kind of morph into each other. And then perhaps most interestingly, they kind of became the environment in schools, right? First in the universities and the colleges, then into the high schools and gradually down. And so you had people in these universities who were using email in their everyday life. They were using laser printers. They created documents on the computer. They started using the web and so on. Gradually, this started to permeate all our lives, starting in the schools, and kind of became today's mass market culture. Who'd have thought it? Well, Alan Kay actually thought of this in 1968, right? And a lot of us in the business really knew about Alan's work, right? It kind of informed what we were thinking about and what we were doing. Another example, NSF, the National Science Foundation, had a digital library project, $4 million over 4 years. They funded 6 colleges. Oh, by the way, one of the outcomes was Google. Well, a lot of other stuff started up in or around the universities as well. And this is pretty much a mainstay of a lot of our economy, a lot of the world's economy nowadays. Kind of just came up out of this stuff. Getting closer to Genie, about 2 weeks ago, Nicira, a company that came out of Stanford 3 years ago, an open flow company, was just purchased for $1.25 billion, right? Which is a pretty good price for a 3-year-old company. And that's because people believe it's really worth that. So in the Genie project, we are starting to build out through campuses across the United States this advanced network that will let you do the internet, but things beyond the internet. In particular, Genie has this idea of deep programmability. I think one of the things that made the internet so good was you could put any software you wanted in your computer and run it. That really opened up the space for innovation. The Genie idea is, great, let's do that through the entire network. Why can't you put the software you want in the cloud, in your routers, in your firewalls, everywhere throughout the network? Let's just totally open it up so that people can put any software they want in the network. How are we building this thing? We're convincing commercial manufacturers to make the smallest change that's necessary to their equipment so it can support this vision. Then we're putting this commercial equipment in a bunch of schools, first in the labs, then in the wiring closets, then throughout the dormitories, and using it. And then we lace this all together to form Genie. Georgia Tech is a great example. We work with the researchers there, but we also work with the CIOs very closely. They've taken a bunch of commercial equipment, very early prototypes, tried it in their lab, figured out how to get the IT staff to support it, and so forth. Now they're building it out through the classroom buildings and their dormitories. So that's the trajectory. So let me ask again, what is it like to live in the future? Well, I have a very kind of pragmatic American answer. Let's find out. Let's invent it. Let's do it ourselves. We aim to have Genie expand to 100 to 200 campuses across the US. We've got a lot of the very brightest young researchers involved in building this and helping make this happen. And in fact, it's happening right here. Case Western, Lev, is playing kind of a key role in getting this whole thing together and making it happen. It's open to all the universities in the US. If you're interested, I encourage you, get in touch with Lev or Gracie, who is here from Youngstown, and let's make it happen together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chip. Terrific. Thank you, Chip. I want to introduce you to Ben Moskowitz. who is working with the Mozilla Foundation, a nonprofit that actually many of us know. Anyone who uses Firefox, Thunderbird, or any of those knows that that's part of the Mozilla ecosystem. The Mozilla Foundation is a not-for-profit. Ben is engaged with Mozilla Foundation to actually engage in a competition around the country with developers, hackers, and others who are going to try to take advantage of G networks, gigabit networks, and future networks to try to drive applications and services on top of them. And I wanted our community to hear what's going on in the Mozilla Foundation world and in the Mozilla Challenge that is out there. Please join me in welcoming Ben.
Morning. I had the agony and ecstasy, I think, of being the last talk, and I have to give you a quick disclaimer, which is that my talk will share a lot of themes with Chip's talk, and there's been no collusion. I just think that we're really on the same page. First, I want to build on what Lev said about Mozilla. A lot of people don't realize that Mozilla is a nonprofit organization. You may know that we make Firefox. It's a really good browser. You may use it. But unlike some of the other companies engaged in this space, we don't have a profit motive. Our motive is to protect the web. And by the web, I mean not just the protocols and the technologies that make the web, but also the culture of the web. There's a culture of sharing. There's a culture of open source. There's a culture of innovation. And it generates a lot of public benefit. We don't want the web and computers to be like appliances. We don't want to support the mentality that they're these agents where you push a button and they take care of a job for you and they go. We want to retain agency. We want to augment and amplify human intelligence with technology. We think that computers should be more like bikes. And actually, the idea of a bicycle for a mind, the bicycle for the mind, is something that was popularized by Steve Jobs. He had this very well-rehearsed anecdote about how he read an article in Scientific American, and humans actually don't have very much efficiency of locomotion. But if they go on a bike, they're some of the fastest and most efficient animals in the animal kingdom, I should say. But you know, like a lot of things, he stole it. He stole it and he packaged it and he made it better. I see your Alan Kay, Chip, and I raise you Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was one of the nation's great scientific leaders around the time of World War II. He was the initiator of the Manhattan Project. And near the end of the war, he published an article that was extremely influential in the Atlantic called As We May Think. And in As We May Think, Vannevar Bush said, "We have bred so much complexity in the modern age. We need machines to begin helping us manage and kind of interface with that complexity." So he projected into the future, and he imagined a device called the Memex. And reading from the Atlantic, I'll just say, this is what Vannevar said: "Consider a future device for individual use, which is sort of a mechanized private file and library. It needs a name, and to coin one at random, Memex will do. A Memex is a device in which an individual stores all his books, records, and communications, and which is mechanized so that it may be consulted with exceeding speed and flexibility. It is an enlarged, intimate supplement to the memory. It augments and amplifies human intelligence." So this is a theme that was picked up by a lot of computer scientists, people like Doug Hobart, people like Alan Kay, and that's where we get the idea that a computer can be like a bicycle for the mind. But I think that the metaphor needs to evolve a little bit, because the computers aren't really the bicycles for the mind anymore. It's the network. It's the kind of bicycle that we assemble at will from the available hardware, software, services, and people. The network is the bicycle for the mind. Let's take some examples, right? Let's talk about applications, which are interfaces for managing all this incredible complexity. Read a letter. And I'll take this from the human perspective, not from the technology perspective. When you want to read a letter today in modernity, you check your email. And what does it mean to check your email? It's to use an application on a mobile device or a computer which connects to some far-off cloud through a cell tower and a chain of routers using complex software, and it requires uptime and maintenance. It's tremendously complex, but we need applications, we need design, we need kind of human interface to the complexity of the network. Collaborate with a colleague. Think about something like Google Docs. Google Docs is similarly very complex. You need to collaborate in real time over a persistent document, and then it needs to be stored, very complex. Get information. Wikipedia. is a version-controlled millions and millions and millions of articles that are created by human beings and by computers. There's a lot of human-computer automation that happens in Wikipedia. And so in all of these, we need design, we need interfaces to kind of manage the complexity of not only hardware, software, services, but also human beings, which I think is really interesting. Which brings us to the idea of the gig, which is what we're here to talk about today. What is a gig for? History is littered with lots of very short-sighted statements, like this one that Bill Gates allegedly made in 1981. 640K of memory should be enough for anyone. He vehemently denies that he says this, but lots of people think that he did. Here's another one. I literally can't imagine any app needing more than 10 megabits per second of bandwidth. I've actually heard this more than once this year. And what's my answer to that? What's our answer to that? Well, I mean, you see some of the answer today, but to be honest, I don't think that we have a really good zinger. We don't have a really good one just yet, because we can't predict how changes in computational scale will change our human experience. We just can't do it. We either wildly overestimate, like this comic strip from the 40s, by 2016, man's intelligence and intellect will be able to increase by drugs and by linking human brains directly to computers. Or it's kind of hopelessly anachronistic, like this AT&T video, which kind of predicted the rise of e-commerce and shopping, but just doesn't feel quite right. Like, why would I be watching a single product? Why would I be holding a phone to my head? Why would I be inserting my credit card directly into the terminal? Hopelessly anachronistic. But like a lot of people have said, we need to just begin inventing the future. We need to try. We need to continue innovating, and we need to push. So the US Ignite Initiative is here to do just that. And our role, Mozilla's role, in the entire initiative is to work with the range of partners, and all of you, hopefully, to kind of build a gigabit bike shop, I'll call it. We want to work with you to kind of build and tune and assemble and research what these bicycles for the mind could be. We have $500,000 in awards and incentives for people who come in and be very experimental and run lots of experiments and see what we can do with these new technologies. We're talking about public benefit applications. We're talking about building a community of practice with people who are coming in, running quick experiments, seeing what works, talking to users, perhaps combining technologies, combining forces, a real kind of renaissance. And we'd like to think of it as a bit of a hacker, tinkerer, gnomish workshop, a gigabit bike shop, if you will. Here's some quick examples. Imagine the ability to pull 3D models from across the web to create persistent learning spaces. So if I want to teach you about any kind of historical battle, if I want to teach you about fluid mechanics, if I want to teach you about anything, let's do it in a simulation. So we've had lots of hack days and events where people come and they build essential pieces of what these apps will need to have. Libraries, building blocks, tools that will someday assemble and make these apps from the future that we're talking about. Macro visualization, right? So we're engaged in the election right now. How cool would it be to run a search term and instantly get all videos in public record that match that search term? So every time the meme of everyone paying their fair share and getting a fair shot, like that's a meme that's spreading, can we visualize and can we see every instance of that meme? And we've had experiments and hacks and demos coming through the US Ignite program like that are quite cool. They give people the ability to see the media and see kind of public discourse, almost like they're looking into a crystal ball. Also looking at ways that we can use low-cost technologies to do things that feel very futuristic. You may have seen the Kinect sensor. It's a Microsoft device. It's a gaming device, actually, but they're really cheap. They're $100. And they can generate these 3D images. They can generate these depth maps. And so we've done hacks, we've done experiments where people take the Kinect sensor and they sit it down and they take a depth image of a person, and bringing it into a computer and bringing it into a 3D scene, you can actually create 3D holography. Like Star Trek holographic video conferencing with a $100 piece of hardware in your web browser, which is really cool. And that's the kind of thing that we think, while maybe not super practical now, is going to make up a set of building blocks that will enable us to make these applications that we all want to see, that are really going to augment and amplify human ability. So let me close out here. And I want to ask you, in your mental model of what a gigabit means, not to think of a single app, not to think of one killer app, but to think about what it will be for your average home internet user, your average home web user, to use a whole suite of these apps. Think about what it will be if you're a student writing a paper, or if you're a journalist investigating a story, a doctor, an activist, using a suite of applications in conjunction with more fidelity than you've ever had. I can sense that I'm going a little bit over. So what I'll do is I'll skip the Vannevar Bush stuff. I think he's a great guy. You should go to Wikipedia and read all about him. And impress upon you that I think it's not just more internet that we're talking about, it's more human potential. It's a bigger surface area for the mind. As we move from talking about things in baud to megabits per second to gigabits per second, we are talking about a bigger surface area, excuse me, for the mind. And so let me leave you with the URL, which is mozillaignite.org. I have so much more to say. Unfortunately, I don't have time to say it. mozillaignite.org. Join our Gigabit Bike Shop. Whether you're a developer or you have a community need, we'd like to work with you to do some experiments. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Look forward to talking to you in person. Well, we're almost done. And the last demonstration we'd like to show you is something we call connected collaboration. We figure if we use the word connected enough, it becomes ours just like Windows became Microsoft's. So we actually have received an NSF eager grant to develop high definition, high fidelity live video that uses the gigabit network bandwidth. And we believe this is a core technology for many of the gigabit applications being fueled by US Ignite, Genie, Mozilla, and others. You're about to see and hear the first public preview of this incredible video and audio that we call connected collaboration. Dr. Benjamin Smith, has he showed up yet? I hear him. Dr. Benjamin Smith is an accomplished software engineer and musician. He is the lead developer for this work. Here's what Ben looks and sounds like over commodity video, just like you can get right now at home over your commodity internet. Ben's going to tell us what we can expect in the future.
The image that you see right now on the right side of the screen is a typical consumer Skype connection. I confess we did not take any extra measures to improve this part of the experience. Now, to allow you to fully appreciate the quality of this connection and how well as a musician I'm able to connect to you through this Skype call, let me play a few notes for you. I think some Bach will start us off. And now, if all systems are go, turn on the HD screen, which should be over to your left, over to my right.
The traditional video.
I would now like to play for you.
And
again.
this is
our
the new
system,
video that we are developing.
Hardware, but optimized to take advantage of gig networks. I don't want to tell you about details. I just want to share some music with you and let you experience it and play us out today. So I'll play that little bit of Bach again. I want to play a little bit of a slow air that I've composed for my son, and improvise a little bit something fast at the end. Here we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much for taking time to join us this morning. There is a cast of thousands to thank for all of the work that was pulled off today. Thanks particularly to Dwayne Bible, who produced this morning's Gigabit Breakfast Club. Thanks to all of the logistics support that was put together. Thanks again to Bob Eckardt from the Cleveland Foundation for his support. We look forward to many more Breakfast Club conversations, and let the conversation continue outside in the lobby for those of you who are still here. Thanks for spending your morning with us.